Okay. So now, I'd like you to look at your list. Because I also think that the acceptance piece of like what's important is the acceptance of what is true and a sense of subjective honesty or personal honesty with stuff. So look at the list that you have and read back over it if you haven't already. And I'd like you to, if you find anything that you're a little waffly on, whether or not you think that that's actually a requirement, I'd like you to cross it off. And if it's something that you immediately go, yeah, that really matters to me, that is a priority, you can circle or star it or something along those lines. Let's go ahead. So you're just whittling it down, funneling it a little bit. Maybe you feel super sure about everything that you wrote. But if you call into question, you may find something. Let's give it a few more seconds. And would you mind sharing something that you feel very certain about being a requirement? Go back around.
The conditions that you want to engage in touch?
Something that's like a, oh yeah, for sure, this matters.
I guess teaching and learning, so and is the big grouping.
That suits
but,
you.
Right, I know, I've created a world in which I can exist exactly as I wish. Games, competitions, and any creative or expressive like lesson. So being in it, but also in this weird perfect world, showing others it's okay, right? Even though it's not my superior, just to know that it's an option.
What is the purpose of learning? Why is learning so important?
Like in general?
Yeah.
I think you should know like what is out there, and you should. I think learning is an experience of knowing that you can do many things different ways, and that you can do many things.
How do you feel when you learn something new?
I get pretty, excited. It depends, right? Like,
What about something about yourself?
I question it. It's like, I guess that's my first instinct.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this doesn't fit what I've been, right? But
Story I've put together.
yeah. So there's this little like, is this true, right? And so sitting with it, but it's getting less and less where there's like this like holding area. I'm not sure if I need to deal with you. It's just kind of like, almost more now like, I think that's true, and like playing with that in like a sub story or narrative. Like, makes sense.
Cool. What's something that's important to you?
I had more of like the word vomit route, but mutual respect, I think, was the first thing I wrote down, and I feel like is, a main tenet in receiving touch and giving touch. And if that's not there and that's not present, then the tendency to disrespect or harm or hurt emotionally or physically is there, it's present. So if the toucher, and the touchy, I guess, in the situation, are at odds, and there's not that mutual respect, that one is a bulldozer and the other one, just gets dozed. I feel like that's not a recipe for healthy relationships of touch.
Okay. Cool. Jim, important for you?
Safety.
Awesome. Important?
Kind of similar to you a bit as well, like the idea of mutual respect. Sometimes also like with desired presence, like if the person doesn't really like desire my presence in the room, I don't really always know it. I'm like, I'm a bit more standoffish in that respect. It's like, if they don't want it, like, it's fine. What's that, right? I think I also linked, like, because the question was ideal conditions of touch for ourselves, right? I think the word ideal is like I don't always know when I would consider ideal, because sometimes it's just like it's very organic. You know what I mean? Like I feel like if I have an open dialogue with someone, if I have open communication, I'm very happy like for like touch to happen organically. You know, I don't really feel like, oh, is this the correct moment to touch you? You know what I mean? So I think it's more for me this having this open communication with people. I think they go hand in hand together. If there isn't open communication, you don't really always feel comfortable to try and touch the other person or question it a lot more, rather than like if there's open communication, I don't really question it. Just like, just go, just let it happen.
I'm fine if you say no and pass. Uno, do you have any context that you had in mind?
Pretty much just like care is what it comes down to. Feeling like there's mutual care.
Really?
Care is an actionable thing to me.
How can you tell that somebody cares?
In the way they want to know me. It's very particular, I guess, for me.
Okay. Listening, maybe. Any part of that? And Brandon?
Conditions for me receiving it.
Sure.
Is that what we're talking about?
Anything you want, buddy?
Gentle and playful at first, and then rough or intimate later. Some people mix those up a little too quick. I think, and then for me, giving it, I try to sense people, like what you were saying, conversationally, like what are they open to talking about, then I get a sense for how they're being willing to be touched. You know, like if they don't want to be touched by ideas, like new ideas, then I won't like invade.
That's interesting.
Does that
Yeah,
make
that's
sense?
cool.
Then
Sure.
I can pick that up, but I also don't expect people to do that for me, but then I also need to learn how to communicate that.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I 100% agree. Communication is huge and all these things. And part of so that was great, thank you. And many of you have touched on the idea of body language being like a big thing of like how you can, I can tell this person, like whether or not this is received or not. But fuck if people don't lie, because, and I'm convinced that a lot of it is because of a lack of self-honesty, which is why I often go through a filtering process of people of like, what is actually true for you? Are you writing things down that you've regurgitated, or are you writing things down that you actually believe in? All these things. So an example, a mutual friend of ours, I went to visit one time and sort of surprised them and was like, okay, like, well, I didn't really have plans, so like, can I crash at your place? Or like, I'll be fine if you say no, because we didn't plan this, right? And and I could see them like filtering through some stuff. And it's like, so sometimes it's like this figuring out the gymnastics of trying to get somebody to be honest with you about what they actually want. So it can be a rocky road of trying to figure this communication out with people. So in that case, I was finally like, okay, if you're telling somebody later, not me, about this situation, would you be like, I didn't know she didn't have any place to go, so I was just like, fine, come over, even though I didn't really want her to, and maybe things would have worked out fine. Or would you be like, no, I really don't want you to, I have plans, and that finally got an honest answer, and I went, and I was fine, like all these things. I've a personal story. I've been in like intimate contact with a guy before where it was like, I feel like you want to kiss, but I don't really know, and how's this going? I was finally like I wanted to let go. I was like, kiss me until you don't want to anymore. And that finally worked. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I'm allowed to excuse myself from the situation. And I think that's part of the fear of a lot of people is like, if I start, then I can't say no anymore because we've set a precedent, which juxtaposes really interestingly with people that are in a committed relationship or whatever kind of relationship you are, where you have some precedents set, and then you're like, well, you're my person. I get to lie on you, and if they don't want to, like they're like, fuck, like we're supposed to do this now because this is like a thing, and that's an issue for a lot of men these days, or of not having touch growing up, and then they're like are 14 and they have their first girlfriend, and they're like, touch, like, whoa, you are my 100% focus on this thing, and now my emotions are tangled in in this because it's my only outlet, and I'm not allowed to touch anybody else. Thank God there's football or jiu-jitsu or something, right? Where you have these other contact points, but I see how that goes in this like really kind of weird dark road, and then fuck the girl's like what the or any relationship, it doesn't have to be guy girl, all those things. So like let's get into a little bit of like active stuff, just kind of playing around like. So communication is huge. I would like to put a box here of like, hey, if you don't like something that we play with, just say, yeah, I don't like that. Like you have permission to. And I agree, we could probably do a lot more prep work going into that right now, but I don't want to take up like a huge amount of time. One just kind of like sort of silly, sort of easy thing I wanted us to play with is being able to recognize from more body perspective, like recognize tension in a body. And one other point I wanted to make. Yes, totally makes sense. That sense of safety issue all the time. If you don't feel like you're accepted or being listened to on what scale, like if you've ever had a bad massage, it probably has something to do with a lack of connection. Like a person like touches you and your body actually like tenses under their touch. And that's one thing I argue with people that are like, I need an elbow dug in really strong, this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you like have to seize up and resist it, then that's probably not what your body's really asking for. Maybe you're craving tactile feedback at all, and that's why you're like, this is great because I feel anything, all these things. And that's one of the ways that I like teach people to do body work sometimes is like, if you apply pressure, does their muscle or their fascia or whatever tense underneath of you or relax, right? And like, on what scale? Like, is it because you drove in too fast? Is it all these things? So just like, can you detect tension? And the point I wanted to come back to is just something that, like, it's a literal connection, right? Like, okay, I can sense some things off of you. Some people are more empathetic than others and can like be like, yeah, they don't really want it, or they do, or it's all these confused waves. One of the things we talked about in like jiu-jitsu self-defense classes is like, up until the point that we are literally touching, you're kind of safe. Like, it was like, you can run away. It's not self-defense yet. Like, you can still run. Like, but once I've actually grabbed onto your wrist, like, okay, now we're doing jiu-jitsu. Because now you have to deal with it, right? All these things. You are now inside or something. Inside space. We're inside space. All these things. So, just to like tell whether or not, and a useful thing to do anyway, I'd like us to just get with a partner and like place your hand on somebody's calf, and they're just going to tense and relax the calf. But take like a few seconds to do so, like either way, and call this ramping, like ramping the muscle. Like, all right, if you take like 3 to 5 seconds to engage a contraction, and for the person on top, you're not doing anything. You're just letting the hand rest. You're trying not to influence the situation. And you're just being a witness, so to speak, of like, what do you notice? You may talk about it or not, or any of these things, and like just do that a couple of times and be like, oh, that's neat. And then let the other person go and be like, oh, okay, this is what it feels like for something to tense. This is what it feels like for something to relax. Okay, so and if you've never really done body work, that may be something you're unfamiliar with, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so play around a little bit with that. Just a couple times each.
Stick it out.
Sure.
Partner, which one first?
You can go ahead. Yes. Almost cramping myself here. Oh God.
Are you tensing?
I just cramped.
Oh.
I am tense. No, it's not you. Apparently, there's some neuromuscular confusion. No, you're good. You're good. I don't think it had anything to do. Well, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe. Apparently, in this degree of plantar flexion, I'm not used to getting my calf, which actually makes sense. And that's me trying to do that.
Cool.
Like
It's deep.
Yeah,
like
internal layers
right.
more than like if I'm up here, maybe I can.
No, actually, that was really good.
You feel like different layers, kind of.
I don't know. Well, I'm gonna cramp it second. Maybe you should do the other. I'm already cramped.
Yeah, I was cramping a little bit.
This is the
Apparently
side
I'm
I
not
shouldn't be
used to
cramping.
my calf very much.
Oh, I think I understand why though, because the foot is flat.
Calf cramps.
Yeah. The plantar, like in plantar flexion, you're not usually squeezing your calf, so it makes sense to, or with a knee flexion as well, like just in combination. I'm sure you guys can post about it later. Yeah, it's like some kind of study about that.
I like Spina's take on cramps.
Yeah, it's positive. Yeah, cool. This is just like it's framing, right? Framing all these things.
But it's funny because I feel like I'm trying really hard, but when you did it, it was like.
You can learn a lot from yourself by playing with ramping stuff. So like one way I teach that stuff is like poke your finger into your thigh, your quad. Another place that's pretty easy for people to do stuff. And like, can you squeeze your quad enough that you can no longer sink in? And like, can you focus on like one area? Like if you want to practice yourself on like feeling tensing and releasing and all these things. And that's can help people with body scans that have trouble sleeping and they want to get kind of embodied. Like, all right, like squeeze your calves, squeeze your quads, squeeze your butt, like squeeze and relax, and just like feeling inside yourself with all these things. I made a note about like generally we trust speech over body language because I think that we are just more used to it. Like we don't study body language that much, but at the same time we are still sort of trained to lie oftentimes to each other via what seems polite and all these things and all that. So like practicing honest speech I think is like one of the truest ways you can start getting into a better relationship with any kind of contact that you're having, any kind of communication, verbal, nonverbal, all these things. We get into that stuff. I am sure there are plenty of books written now. Like, you know, there was the Why We Sleep book from Matthew Walker is like really big in like the circles that a lot of us run in right now. Like basically it's just like sleep is good, guys. Like, you know, it's really kind of the bottom line. And it's amazing that we have like books telling us why sleep is good. And you're like, cool, like talk about like basic things that we understand intrinsically but have convinced ourselves we don't need to be convinced that it's not a waste of our time. So like touch, I think falls into that category of like, oh, like you need to be convinced that it's like nice to like do this in a way like, oh, okay. Or like you hurt yourself, you immediately like rub it, you know, you have that analgesic effect of going into things. So I'm sure that if there aren't now, there will probably soon be books about like even more popular about like, oh, what touch does for you and the diffusion of electrons and these things. And there'll be studies done about like, oh, did you know that oxytocin, when you have like 5 minutes of touch per day with somebody that you trust, that your IQ score goes up 25 points on average, you know, that kind of thing.
It does?
Totally, yes. Exactly.
Read the book on
If you believe that, you haven't been touched.
All these things. Exactly. Make me smarter. And I mean, but I can say too, like getting into more intimate settings and things like that, that communication is such a huge thing with it too. Like, and if you're not, but honest communication, like you're touching each other in a way of like, this is what I actually like. And what people are afraid of most is being honest. And I would maybe go back to when I was listening to Aubrey Marcus all the time too. We talk about that with like, when you're being authentic, when you're wearing a mask and you're like, this is what I want to project into the world and all these things, like, it's great because like, anybody says anything mean to me, it's the mask. It doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really affect me because it's not even me. I'm not really that person. But at the same time, that mask also absorbs any love that's coming at you. Anything that's coming at you. You talk about like what feels like true vulnerability, right? The idea of like, oh, I'm actually showing my honest self. Fuck, if they don't like this, I've got no more layers back to this.
That's it.
Yeah, I guess I'll go be a hermit now. You know, I'm gonna die away from the tribe. Like, there's no other stuff about this. But like, there is a resonance to that, and I don't have enough like studies or anything like that. But people are very much attracted to authenticity and like feeling like, oh, this is a real person. This like we can feel. Actually, one of the ways I coach people on like figuring out their own sense of honesty, or like when they're making a decision about what they actually want to do, is like the idea of trying things on, like almost going in a dressing room. I am deciding whether or not I want to go to college or take this job, and you talk to yourself. You say, I want to go to college. I want to take this job, and like, what is the internal feeling? What is the voice inside? Like, what is is there a lift or a fall? Did your voice probably betray you because there's a falling intonation or a rising intonation about the things that excite you, that you feel honest about, or the things that you don't really want to do? And also, there is, I currently 100% believe in this, that like when you make the decision that actually feels right to you, whether or not it brings you into a state of excitement, it is also accompanied by a calm. Versus when you say, like, I'm going to commit to this other thing, there tends to be more of a sense of agitation, because there's something in you trying to tell you that this is something you actually don't want, all these things. So how do you start incorporating things that matter, anything that matters to you more in your life? they're scheduling some time, you find people around you that might be into it, that you feel safe with. That your ideal situation in all of our cases probably involved somebody that we trust and have open communication with, and we've created a container in which we're going to study. I have a friend who she and her husband are going to practice kissing because he's not really into it and she really is. So like, let's work on this because this matters to me, and let's see if we can both go into this thing where we actually like feel better about it. So, you know, and hopefully giving somebody else the space to actually say no if they don't want to. So a sense of safety pretty much always comes with knowing that you have an exit, right? The more you're pinned to the ground, the more of an issue you're gonna have here, the more threat that you're gonna feel, or the more backed into a corner. So like getting clear with someone on like, okay, like you have the option to say no, this is what I want, this matters to me, and if you're not the person that wants to do this with me, that is absolutely fine, and I don't love you any less, and I would like to find somebody that feels this, but since it is important to me, just maybe, we can work on this in some level that works for the both of us. And going to that. So the implications of touch, that is the nutrients that we need to survive and feel better and be comforted. And I think that's one of the reasons why like weighted blankets and things are so popular these days too, is because it's like, oh, like cool. How can, there's so much of our lives today is hacks, as you speak, of like, how can I avoid doing the thing I actually want to do? Like, how can I avoid this thing that makes me feel vulnerable? What's the least amount of water I can drink, like, to do this stuff? What is the least amount of exercise I can do, least amount of movement? Can I do this in 5 minutes? Okay, then I want to do whatever, like, external stuff we've done. So I think something, you know, maybe weighted blankets feel really great, but like, I think that's kind of a case of like, well, I don't have to involve anybody else in this situation. I still get to feel pressure because that feels good to me. And moving on out. But if we can maybe get into a place where we can at least have more honest conversations with other people about what we actually think, what we actually feel, and what we want, that you can get more of what you want if you ask for it and you have self-inquiry into what actually matters to you. And you get braver, right? It's just that same thing you talked about with the neurotags and things of like, okay, like, I asked one person about something that I wanted. I asked one person to like give me a hug that really mattered, and I've hugged people plenty of times, like the long hug thing, right? How many people have like started crying?
A lot,
Yeah, right? And it's like, whoa, there's just like that letdown.
They just melt.
Yeah.
They literally melt out of their face.
There's like,
Yeah.
what is
Like,
that?
yes, it just releases, like you said, I like the way you said, like, yeah, it kind of releases charge. You know, there's this pent up something or other where, you know, somebody's not heard or not felt, or felt like they're not fully embraced, like mentally, emotionally, physically, and that embrace, you know, serves as that thing for all of those characteristics or caveats.
And I would say a non-judgmental embrace, right? Because there's love is patient, love is kind kind of stuff. Like, if you ever work with a body worker or are talking to a therapist or whatever, that needs you to be better, needs you to relax. Like, I derive my self-worth from whether or not you relax right now. It's not easy to relax in that situation, but a genuine witness to what is happening. So my experience with with Thai massage is I learned a lot of choreography at first, and then I learned more choreography. I mean, they present with these things, you do these other things, and all this stuff, and that's great. And here's how you, at least like, there's how you tell tension and when it releases and all these things. But then, like, at some point in my career, I was like walking up somebody's leg on the choreography, and I'm looking at the other leg, and I'm like, I want to work on that leg. I don't want to work on this leg anymore. And then somewhere I actually like opened that door into intuition land. And as soon as I did that, and I was actually listening to what I was feeling from their body, everybody fell asleep immediately. Like, something in the nervous system was like, safe. I'm safe and heard and accepted for what I actually am feeling. And I find the more and more I open those doors, the more barriers I can bring down to like be a witness for people, like whether that's talking about visions that I have, or like things that I sense, or like a word pops in my head and I say, does that mean anything to you? Or whatever. The fewer barriers are between what I actually feel and what I report and what I communicate with the person, the more healing occurs. So at its bottom line, I think that touch can just be an excellent conveyance and another element of in our movement vocabulary for acceptance of others. And if you ever want any drills or anything for it, I had other ideas. But I think that we're kind of on the probably the end of this, and we have an open mat. to have.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or anything? And I said very controversial things, I know. So I didn't,
I think that I always say biopsychosocial, and that I'm a social theorist, and I have a lot of time spent doing social analysis and sociology and stuff like that, and people, I just think there's always so much more to the social side, and that it's reflexive, that it's reflexive, and so it doesn't just go one way, We understand the body affects the psyche affects the body, but we don't see so much how the society affects them and how they affect this society. And so in terms of touch, I think it's really important that the environment is really, really crucial too, and it determines a lot of factors. And I can be with someone that I'm very, very happy to touch, in any way, but be in a situation where it's not appropriate. It's either busy or dangerous, or there might be hostility to me, holding hands with a guy, or we just might not be comfortable. A heterosexual couple might be, it's not okay to kiss there, or even hold hands, or there's a lot of social variables that impinge on it. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. And a dojo is a line. There's a line, and past that line, a certain touch is authorized, in a very formal setting, right? There are very clear rules. And, I think that as we look around, it's not just about me and how I feel, whether I'm afraid or not, or I'm wanted or not. It's about what is the world that we're building, that we're accepting, what are the things that we're consenting to, what can we change to make this more safe and more healthy.
and can we want for people what they actually want for themselves?
Say that
And
again?
can we want for people what they actually want for themselves, being the driving force? Like, how much do I need you to be a certain way for me to be happy versus like, oh, well, I want you to do what you want to do, and my line stops where, what I want stops when you also have your own autonomy. You're like, okay, well, you said no to that, and I can go over here and find somebody that also wants to be with me.
There's
or do
always consensual interaction as we create society and culture, and there's always a mix. So yeah, but there is in the end a certain agreement that is put in place that we recognize, and it's not going to fit all of us, but we consent to it, and then we find another space where I can have an orgy if that's what I want to have.
Mm-hmm.
And they go into like norms versus rules, right? Norms are there's no rules posted, right? But there's this norm that generally this is okay, this is not okay. And then like when the norms get out of control, then
That's
the
right.
rules.
Or norms get out of control, they become tacit rules
Then who-
imposed through imposing subconscious kinds of,
And then that leads
Right.
into, like who enforces the rules then,
Yeah.
right? Like there's these rules, but who's
if
gonna?
you touch her and we look away,
Mm-hmm.
that tells something.
Acceptance, yeah.
I also think expression and touch doesn't have to be all this like super soft stuff either. Like that isn't exactly a tangent off here, but just thought of it like of like I've been working on people and realized that they needed like very aggressive expulsion stuff, like slamming med balls or like punching a bag or doing boxing or something like that. So like we can think of touch like outside of the social construct even too, of like I am touching by doing stuff. Or one of the things, my obsession with the idea of flow state, one way to take people out of their heads is that like massage your own arm and not like massaging my arm. It's like, oh no, like what actually feels good? Like you can't logic what feels good. Like you could add it on later. You'd be like, oh, that probably feels good because blah, blah. But like the actual feeling is something you can't like logic out. So it's like, okay, it forces you to get out of your head and into like, oh, well, if that feels good, then what else feels good? And like moving on from there. But no, excellent points about that as well.
Well, not really a question, but we were talking about rules and stuff.
Mm.
Come from the Bay Area, we have this thing called cuddle parties,
Yeah.
and there are rules. Like it's an actual party,
Mhm.
and they have people who are cuddlists. Like they're actually like personal training for cuddling because they understand touch starvation is a real thing.
We hope to men, it's called men cuddling men, clothed, asexual, but intimate cuddling, and it was just on somebody's living room floor. Very clear rules, very, very accepting, very embracing, it was wonderful. And it was just half an hour cuddle, and then we kind of get up and we shift around. People on the outside could go on the inside if they wanted, and you guys loved it. All kinds of,
In this, like you said, there are these professionals. Like, are people like in a line to like for these professionals, or the professionals like teaching the group?
I think it's more one-on-one intimate because it's like in a therapeutic setting where people do have other things going on. It's not like, I don't know how to touch. Can you help me learn? There's a lot of stuff wrapped up into it.
Ours was a big pile.
You hear that a lot about like sex workers and stuff, like how much therapy like sex workers end up giving to people, like men that going to strip clubs that like can't talk to their wives about something or whatever, or like these kinds of things, or disabilities that make it difficult for them to find people to get through stuff. Yeah.
I often feel that, I think it's about intimacy, and I often with my friends and with other people, I really want to, number one, I want to lay on the floor, or be on the floor, not in chairs or in a cafe, but I really just want to, I guess you call it hanging out, just really just, but I want some touch, especially if I'm going to talk about sincere, serious stuff. Because I see people talking heads there, it's from their throat up, and it goes on, and then we kind of negotiate this dance between our heads, and I'm always wanting to come into the full self, and I can do anything I want with my head, it's all performance.
When I eat brunch with people, I ask, are you a sharer or are you or are you not? Because that will dictate the way that I order. Because if one of us gets sweet and one of us gets salty, then we just have all the bases covered on these things. But like I've thought about that same kind of application to like group hangouts. Like if you normally be like, hey, you a cuddler? Okay, cool. Then I'll know like it's cool to like go over here and like put my head in your lap and you're not like, are they trying to hit on me? Like or maybe you are, I don't know, or like I appreciate boxes for learning situation of like, we have strict rules about a cuddling thing and like how helpful that can be for people to open up because like, oh, I feel safe because this is the rule and this stuff here. And I also like dream of a world in which like we just literally do what we want and also feel comfortable saying no because like, what if you're at a cuddle party and you end up liking somebody and you want to do more? Like, are we back to vilifying the sexual aspect of things and like all the pile-ups and layers that we get into that stuff of like, oh, okay, like, so you're allowed to be intimate to this line and no more and cut that off and then you have another place to do it and all these things. Like,
but if you put your head on my lap and ask me how I'm doing, you're gonna get a very different answer. And it may be just some of the similar words, but it's gonna be a very different answer coming from me than if you sit over there and say,
how you doing?
Yeah, and it's like, I'm gonna be in the middle of something and
Yes.
you know what I'm saying? But you put your hand on my lap, and it's just going to be, I don't know, butter. And
Dogs get it. They don't stare at you from
That's a great point. Think of all, talk about like the compensation strategies, all the pet therapy, horse therapy, all these things where we're like, oh, like great, there's a creature that genuinely wants me to hug it and will leave if it doesn't want to, so I believe it because it doesn't know how to lie. Like okay, like maybe we could do, what do you like about this thing with the dog therapy? Like maybe we could find humans that actually can have open communication with you and stuff. But
although the dogs are,
they're great,
horses,
don't get me
they're
wrong.
pure genius. And
Dolphins,
thank God,
yeah, for
thank
sure.
They
Yeah.
talk.
Thank domestication.
Skin talk.
Oh man.